This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. Talk Catholic with Tim Kilcoyne. It is our first Saturday, time for the interview of a lifetime. And we have the priest of a lifetime, Father Frank Pavone, a priest for life, and a round two on the deep church. Indeed, it does exist. And we'll get back to our book review on the other side of our break with Mother Mary Angelica's Answers, Not Promises. But first, don't you forget your first Saturday devotions. As we have Holy Week around the corner, go to confession, go to Mass, say the Rosary, meditate 15 minutes on a particular mystery, and do a work of charity, and talk to Our Lady directly. And I should quickly share that on Ash Wednesday past, I was sitting and doing adoration time, and I was just thrilled. It was one of the great experiences of my lifetime as I saw 3 different classes of middle school children, boys and girls, come in with their teacher and just sit in utter silence. And it was reverence before our Lord. And I thought, even in my day, we often think that everything was so much better. But I don't recall doing that with even our sisters, who we did have in abundance, that I had in grammar school. We went to Mass and we learned our faith, but we didn't spend enough time before Jesus together in silence. It was awesome. Oh, I was ready to break into a sermon and tell those kids, don't you ever break this regimen. When your teacher can't bring you, you'll remember what to do. Okay, well, we'll pick it up with Father, just as I'm more than suggesting that the politics of our clergy, oh, so too many of them, is rooted in Acts of the Apostles, but it's distorted. Let's hear.
Go right to the jugular here, Father. It's my belief that in Acts of the Apostles, where there's the referencing of contributing according to ability, receiving according to need, which is the Marxist manifesto, this is a model that can work in consecrated life, in religious community life, etc. But and I believe that because the priests, like you just said, have only received in the economic realm, from the beginning of seminary into parish life, etc., they haven't been immersed into that quote-unquote real world of dog eat dog and how we're going to put bread on the table and the whole bit. That somehow they don't see the disconnect between consecrated life, the charism and calling to move in that direction, versus the rest of us baptized Catholics that are out here in the jungle. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's an important observation, because consecrated life is meant to point us to the world to come. It's a sign in this world of the way things are going to be later, where it's the same reason that they don't get married, because Jesus said there isn't marriage in heaven.
Right.
You're going to be with your spouse and your loved ones in heaven.
Yes.
Mess it up.
Right.
We all have to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. But we get to heaven. Those who get to heaven, yes, we're going to be with our spouses and our families and our children, but there isn't marriage as such as an institution. Right. Marriage is a pointer. Yep. It's a pointer to the full face-to-face relationship, perfect union with God. Okay, so consecrated life, you renounce marriage, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because you're a living sign of the kingdom to come. Now, it's the same with possessions. You're renouncing possessions, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because in the world to come, we'll all have everything, and God will be everything that we need, but there will also be things that we will have.
Yep.
So the reality is that those that are in consecrated life, or even those that are in, you may not be in a religious order, but if you're a priest, you have a lot of those common elements.
Absolutely.
You have to take account of the fact that this is not teaching us what the average believer, most of the majority of believers in the church, the way that they have to live now. there is a reality of private property
Right.
that is essential.
Yep.
Hard work to earn what we need,
Yep.
contributing to the community by being inventing and creating,
Yep.
and having the protections to grow your small business,
Very good.
without being suffocated by government regulations
Exactly.
or being suffocated in your motivation
Yep.
by the fear that, hey, the government's just going to take what I produce anyway, so why should I work hard to produce more if it's not going to be mine?
Exactly.
So I've been working with priests for 35 years in this ministry. I don't find a great awareness of this among the clergy. To your point,
I find almost zero. Yeah, no, I mean, they are prey, so vulnerable to becoming a socialist, a Marxist socialist, okay? Because that and this latest pandemic of the last 3 years and the silence of our church's leadership in the midst of dictatorship in your face, it was mind-boggling. No, it was almost, Rome was burning and there was like no mention of it. I mean, it was.
Did you notice too that when state governments began relaxing the mandates and opening things up again? How the church bureaucracy lagged behind.
Oh, big time.
There were right.
Yeah.
States were opening up communities, and churches were still requiring masks, and it's like, I don't know. And there is a problem. There is a deep church.
Oh yeah. Well,
there's weaponization too. I'm an example of
absolutely. Speak to that. I don't want to go off tangent, but give us a little bit of your personal on this, because you are the epitome of the tyranny.
Well, what happened was that some of the bishops didn't like the fact that I was out there preaching the gospel of life, being really stronger on abortion than most of them are, and more political than most of them are. I was criticizing the Democrat Party, criticizing Biden, specifically supporting Trump, and they tried in numerous ways over the course of 2 decades to sideline and silence me. But if they had been honest about it, we could have had an honest conversation. But they weren't honest about it. They did the same thing to me in the church realm that they did to President Trump in the political realm. That is, invent false narratives, fake crimes, so to speak, and just use power to try to silence you. And I resisted that. I resisted that tooth and nail. I used all the appropriate processes in the church to defend my right to continue my ministry, serving the unborn.
Right.
So ultimately, I left them no option except to kick me out of the priesthood altogether, which is what they did, which is completely crazy. And people scratching their heads. It's a weaponization of government because they want the deep church people want the same thing that the deep state people want. They want this one world globalist mindset. They're on the side of the Democrat Party. And look at what Biden recently did. He gives the Medal of Presidential Medal of Honor, with a Medal of Freedom, I should say, with distinction to Pope Francis. There's a lot going on there.
They're giving their colors away, actually. It's kind of,
they sure are.
I'm just kind of glad it's out in the open. Finally, it just took some decades for us to figure this out. Which takes me back, as in a previous interview, I mentioned, that I'm coming out of those 1970s Jesuit University theology undergrad major, and I knew coming home to mom and dad and saying, I don't know what they're teaching down here, but it ain't the Catholic faith. That much I do know. I think I mentioned in the last, I said, I've got all my books, Father, in the garage a few steps away, 1977 to 81, okay? I hate to say my alma mater, but not one of these books, okay, is faithful to magisterial teaching, I promise.
Wow.
Not one. Wow. I was ready to throw them in the dumpster, and I heard God saying, "Don't you dare do that, Tim. You've got the evidence." So
so there you go. It's evidence.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Pope. He's no different than every professor I had. Okay, back in the 1970s.
Well, and here's the good news, and this might encourage our listeners to, if they're asking, well, what do I do about this? Here's the good news. As you know full well, the faith is open and public. In other words, the Pope doesn't have any books of the Bible that we don't have.
Right.
He doesn't have any
Right.
any chapters of the Catechism
Right.
that the rest of us don't have.
Yes.
And that's the good news, because that's how we keep them accountable. We do it in a humble way,
Oh, yeah.
but we do it in a clear-minded way. We're not stupid. We don't leave our minds at the door, just because we have a loyalty to the faith and to the church and to its leaders.
Right.
We do have a reverence and a respect, just like we have a respect for the office of the presidency. So you can have failed leaders and still have respect for leadership.
Exactly. Exactly.
You can rebuke authority and still be obedient to authority.
Absolutely.
So the point is the faith is open to everybody. So people in the pews know the faith. If they hear their pastor saying something, or they read a document from their bishop, or even from the Pope, that's like, wait a second, alarms go off in their mind. They say, this isn't the faith that's been handed on to us. They have a right to ask pastors, challenge their pastors in a very humble way, but very clearly say, hey, where does this come from?
Yeah.
Because we're not here to listen to you. We're here to listen to the teachings of Christ that are supposed to be coming through you.
Right.
But we're not here to listen to you. So please make the distinction for us.
Right.
Please make it now.
Right.
Don't leave us in limbo.
Well, I totally agree with you. The keeping open of the airwaves, i.e. the internet, etc., saved America on November 5th. Okay, no question. And it's saving the church right now, because as I said just to somebody the other day, they're never going to get away with what they got away with for 50 years ever again. As long as those airways stay, the new frontier of the new evangelization, which is the airways for sure.
This is such an important point.
Critical.
Because Russell Shaw, it was the communications director for the U.S. bishops back some decades ago, and he wrote a book called Nothing to Hide.
Yes.
I strongly recommend that book to anyone who's interested in this conversation we're having right now.
Yeah, I have it actually.
Because Russell, openly admits, says, hey, look, here's one of the problems. Closed circles of communication, no accountability, and no explanation for their decision-making.
Completely.
What you said is so important, because what just happened in America, Elon buying Twitter and changing it to X, giving, I think that's the most significant action for freedom of speech in our recent history. And so what's happening is that the same people that went into the voting booth are worshiping and sitting in the pews of the churches. Just like they're not going to tolerate the censorship in the social media and the mainstream media, they're not going to tolerate any more censorship in the church.
Exactly.
Bishops who are making decisions, look, again, we respect authority, we obey a legitimate authority, but bishops that are making decisions, popes that are making decisions, that, number one, it raises the red flags. It's like, hey, this doesn't sound like the Catholic faith to me. And number two, and they're not giving explanations for their decisions, they're not going to get away with that anymore. They're not going to get away with it.
No.
They have to explain themselves.
There's such a disconnect with the local church versus what we learn about the church via the airwaves. We have this is the deep church we're talking about. I was confronted by somebody just the other day, and she wanted me to do this, that, and the other. And I said, well, what we really need is a war room in the Catholic Church, okay? We need to identify the enemy, okay? Yeah. Who is Catholic and who is not, and where is the headquarters? Well, I think it's called the Chancery, right? And so therefore, who are the power brokers in the Chancery, and what is their background? Where did they come from? I got news, because I went to school with these people in the 1970s, okay? They were all in on the new theology of Charles Curran and Skillebecks and Ruther and the whole gang. Those were all the gurus of the 1970s theology. They all bought in completely, and they are running your local diocese, ladies and gentlemen. And they've got the bishop held hostage. He might be a good guy, but he's surrounded by these people with the three letters after their name that guarantee a lack of orthodoxy. And the poor lay faithful, they kind of know it's true, but it's so overwhelming because of the numbers that are in that bureaucratic maze. Thank the Lord and Mother Mary Angelica more than anybody, who saw all of this coming and said, well, we got to do an end around. We got to just get God's word of truth out there to the masses, and then hopefully the ripple effect and trickle down will get to your local parish. But there's just a lot of terrible damage being done in the meantime by these very marauders who I don't believe are Catholic, and I know they're not Catholic. They couldn't pass a 25-point quiz on the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I believe that.
It's an exact parallel with what's going on in government. So right now we've got a very, very big, something for people to pay attention to as we enter into this transition now, the new Trump administration, is what's going to happen with personnel. He's going to shift the ground, and he's going to say, if you're in one of these bureaucratic offices in government, if you're not implementing the agenda that the voters just voted for, you're out. You're out. Now, sometimes it's not so easy, because of certain laws and things that are in place. But President Trump is going to change a lot of that. He's going to change all of the things that he's permitted to change as president. But we've got to shine the light. Now, in the church, it doesn't work the same way. We don't have elections, but we do have accountability to the people, and that's what if the people insist on it. See, I think, Tim, that's the direction we got to go in now. Is that look, we know we don't elect our pastors, we don't elect our bishops, okay, but that doesn't mean we can't hold them accountable. We've got to shine the light.
I remember talking to John Henry, John Henry Weston of LifeSite, and he talked about lobbying the bishops. In politics, you lobby, right, for your special interest, etc. What is preventing the lobbying action, right, of the lay faithful to just hit the phone lines and pepper that chancery?
That's one thing that can be done. Definitely. Another thing that can be done is that if they're making decisions that are public, if they're issuing statements that are public, go back at the substance of the statement, not at the person necessarily, but the person indirectly, and say, wait a minute, so-and-so in the chancery of such and such a diocese said A, B, and C. Put A, B, and C under the spotlight of the faith. And do it publicly. Use social media. You mentioned Mother Angelica. It's the same thing with Priests for Life. That's the other thing people need to realize is that when we talk about, quote unquote, the church, we're not just talking about parish and diocese. The church also consists of many movements that the Holy Spirit inspires God's people to create. The pro-life movement is one of those movements. Priests for Life, EWTN, all these different things. People need to be using, joining, promoting, and supporting these different movements in the church. That's the way forward. And if necessary, say to your bishop when he sends you the diocesan appeal, hey, sorry, bishop, but I'm supporting these other movements until you are teaching the Catholic faith again.
Only straight truth from a man who waits for justice and the restoration of his priesthood. We will pray, Father. Next month, first Saturday, we'll continue on with Father Frank Pavone. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. On the other side, Mother Angelica's Answers, Not Promises. Well, Mother Angelica is about to tell us how to respond when we're hurt. Doesn't get better than the Daughters of St. Paul and the prayer of St. Francis for your Lenten reflection.
And where
Well, we're in the chapter, How Can I Forgive Someone Who Hurt Me So Much? And Mother rattled off some very concrete scenarios. Your wound may be fresh and your pain and outrage may be completely justified. You might be a parent who spent years of sacrifice raising your child only to have him or her run away, rebel in devastating ways like drugs, sex, or alcohol abuse. You might be a spouse who served your marriage with a glad and open heart, only to have your husband or wife run off with another person. You might be a business partner who trusted your associate only to discover he or she has been embezzling from the company. And she goes on and she says, what do you do when your pain is so justified? How do you respond when it feels so righteous to stew in your anger and resentment and contempt? You try to think and act like Jesus. Mother says, if, for example, you have recently been hurt by someone, you should resist your natural inclination to share your tragedy with all your friends and relatives, the people who are quote-unquote on your side. Jesus confided secretly in his Father, and his is a great lesson for us all. Spreading the pain does nothing to alleviate it, and if the truth be known, you most often are simply boring people or making their lives miserable. Worse, our tendency at these times is to cry on the shoulders of those people who will give us dangerous sympathy and short-term advice, the kind of counsel that leads us away from reconciliation and toward outrage and resentment and bitterness. I'm not saying you should keep everything inside you, but that you should exercise caution in whom you turn to in moments of human pain. Seek guidance from people whose wisdom and prudence will help you form a response that will truly heal you and your oppressor in the long run. It might be a priest or a minister or a rabbi or a good friend or somebody who can lend a spiritual ear. The point is that you are in a dangerous position now. You have been truly wronged, and your indignation could arm you with a curled lip and the desire for revenge. The truth of your injustice makes you feel secure in your hatred. Suddenly you will be locked into the position of getting even. But what really happens is that you lose the ability to discern right from wrong and you avoid the difficult but necessary Christian response. The result is that whatever your initial wound was, it is far worse now because now you have succumbed to the temptation to hate. In the meantime, another danger in trying to rally support from friends after you've been hurt by someone is the likelihood that the very person who hurt you will eventually hear about the problem from one of your friends. Sometimes this happens because your friends are trying to help the situation, but all they do is add to the problem. Suppose you and I had a disagreement. We each tell 2 or 3 people, and they in turn tell 2 or 3 other people, like the child's game of telephone. By the time it gets back to you and me, it will probably be blown all out of proportion to the actual disagreement. And then Mother provides a few concrete scenarios. A friend hurts you, so you cast aside the friendship and never find out what really happened. Your child says something in anger and you give her the silent treatment for days. Your husband is lazy around the house and instead of asking him to help you, you stomp about in a constant rage. When you're on the road to forgiveness, you circumvent all of these self-destructive feelings and vengeful behavior and replace them with an objective, determined effort to love. You protect your heart from hardening to all feelings and stop yourself from becoming a callous, cynical human being. Your path is the path of Jesus instead of the course of your own emotions. And once you arrive at a true state of forgiveness, your heart becomes open to compassion and understanding. Okay, well, I don't disagree with any of what Mother Angelica just gave to us, except I don't believe it's the number one pastoral strategy for conflict resolution. And one must remember a couple of things about our good Mother Angelica. She was a woman, and she was from the World War II generation. And it is my absolute life experience that, well, let's take the World War II generation. There was an overwhelming tendency to keep everything hush. Just keep it to yourself and then offer it up would be the old spiritual only strategy. Okay. That's a strategy. But the wound remains open, and that does terrible internal damage for sure that was not warranted. And now the innocent is a victim. And those of that generation had an inordinate amount of pride and desire for privacy, where they just didn't want confrontation because others might see or hear, to use the old phrase, the dirty laundry. And the fact is, life is political. And the goal is to get the politics on your side when you're hurt. And that means rallying the troops, which does require relaying very confidential info to hopefully those select troopers, not the whole wide world, but those who are on your side and are going to stand with you for the truth, to rise and prevail, which it always has to do, by the way, whether it be in this life or the next. So action for justice is the other flip side of this coin. And that's why I mentioned mother being a woman, because as I said to a sister not all that long ago, now ladies, go easy on me. Sister, there's one big difference between me and you. You're a woman and I'm a man. And you tend to opt for another cup of tea and see if there's 16 different alternatives for action. But too often it stays right there at the table. And I'm a guy and we have a tendency to want to fix things. What's broke? Let's go after it. Nothing has changed regarding human nature in men and women in that regard. And therefore, the very prudent strategy is to get advice from both wise male and female voices. Remember, too often, as I've said in a book that I'm actually writing, one of the primary chapters is going to be, not my family, okay? One of the reasons people hide behind the pride and privacy to, protect their hurt is partially because they're kind of okay with the sin. As a friend of mine often uses the expression, they're in their comfort zone and they're okay with it, even though it's completely dysfunctional. So they don't want help, especially from the outside. They don't want conflict resolution at the table. And that is going to require change on perhaps everyone's part. That doesn't fly well with good old human nature. I'm sure Mother Angelica would agree there are only two things that change a person most of the time. One is God directly, or good old guilt. Yes, sirree, and lots of it. And that's why you need people on your side who care about the truth. We do here. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We are on your side every week. Have a great week. God bless. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.